dementia, connecting our lives to help us survive. So we spend our time to the fullest we can.
Hi, welcome to Dementia Action Alliance and our dementia discussions and professional insights. My name is Laurie Scher. I am on the advisory board and the board of directors for Dementia Action Alliance. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Matt Sharp from AFTD. Matt, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Matt has joined the staff. Matt had joined the staff of AFTD in December of 2009 as a program coordinator. AFTD stands for the Association of Frontotemporal Degeneration. Having earned his Master of Social Service degree from Bryn Mawr College, Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research, he made a career transition to social services from the field of natural sciences. Matt is integral to AFTD's patient and caregiver support and education efforts and helped develop AFTD's grassroots network. It's such a privilege to have Matt. I've known Matt for a few years, and it's great to see you once again, Matt. Welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So, Matt, today we're kind of talking about why is it important to try and get another diagnosis. I know of people who were diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and that seems to be the first diagnosis a neurologist goes to. Oh, you have Alzheimer's, that's it. And I know a number of people that have later been diagnosed as no, it's not Alzheimer's, it's Lewy body. But why is it important to seek perhaps an accurate dementia diagnosis?
So, as you all probably know, that there are a lot of different causes of dementia. So dementia is a collection of symptoms that are caused by an underlying disease. And I've heard people say that there's over 300 different causes of dementia. The ones we're mostly talking about are generally categorized as neurodegenerative diseases. And of those, Alzheimer's is far and away the most common, but it certainly isn't the only one. So again, like you said, a lot of people simply assume Alzheimer's, and that is often just not correct. So getting an accurate diagnosis will, first of all, allow you to get proper care. So, for example, in Lewy body disease, people with Lewy body disease can have horrible reactions to some antipsychotic medications. But they're often given those because doctors label them as Alzheimer's. In FTD, there's a drug called memantine that was developed for Alzheimer's disease. It's almost always prescribed whenever somebody is diagnosed with FTD. For some people, it can actually help because there can sometimes even be a mix of a little bit of Alzheimer's and FTD. But for other people, it does basically nothing and it costs money. In a small number of cases, it can actually have some pretty bad side effects as well. So again, if you're going into the doctor with an Alzheimer's diagnosis, they're going to give you Alzheimer's drugs, and some of them probably aren't going to help you, and some of them may even hurt you. Also, with all of these diseases, over time, things change. And while it's not possible to always predict exactly what the sequence of changes are or where things are going to go, you do have a general idea. So things, after a certain amount of time after Alzheimer's diagnosis is made, it's going to look very different than the same amount of time with an FTD diagnosis. So even though you don't know specifics with any certainty, you can still make some broad general plans for care. And sort of at least know that things are going to change over time. And also, some of the things that occur in FTD simply aren't going to happen in other types of dementia. So, for example, in FTD, even when people are diagnosed with behavioral variant FTD, many people can still go on to develop language difficulties and start having trouble communicating. So if you know that from the beginning, you can at least prepare for it as best you can. And that sort of will help you identify, what help may be needed. It may not end up being necessary, but if you know it may be needed, you can at least go and identify where it is. So you're not scrambling after the fact, trying to take care of problems that you weren't expecting because that wasn't supposed to be part of your diagnosis. And finally, I think something that is probably under-mentioned in dementia is that with a correct diagnosis, you can find real peer support. And that's something I think that's becoming more available, and it's something that people who are living with these diseases are seeking out and creating for themselves, is supporting each other. And the group of people with Alzheimer's is going to be very different than a group of people with FTD. So it can help you connect to other people who may be experiencing some of the same things that you're going through.
Thank you. And I know I was diagnosed with FTD, and there are times that I have issues with speaking. So my husband has learned 20 American Sign Language signs so that when I can't communicate, that he knows the basics, bathroom and drink and things like that. So you're right. I really agree with your statement about being prepared for what might come. That's pretty important, I think, to know what's ahead. Although we don't know everything that's ahead, to be prepared in case it happens, I think is great. What symptoms would make me suspect that perhaps the original diagnosis that the doctor gave me, or if the doctor just said you have dementia and didn't specify a type, what symptoms would make me suspect that I need further testing to confirm a better diagnosis?
Well, I think first of all is your age. So FTD is actually the most common form of dementia in people under 60. So right from the get-go, if you're in your 50s to 60s and someone gives you a dementia diagnosis, you should actually be expecting FTD rather than Alzheimer's disease. As people get older, the chance of Alzheimer's increases dramatically. So, but typically, most people, when they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's, are in their 70s to 80s. So that is a big difference between, say, a 55-year-old and a 75-year-old. So that's probably one of the first signs. Also, chances are, if it's FTD, the first symptoms won't have anything to do with memory loss. There's such a range of different symptoms in FTD. That's one of the sort of more challenging pieces of the disease. Some people can present or start off with language problems, difficulty speaking or coming up with words. For other people, the initial symptoms may actually look more like something like bipolar disorder. Or even sometimes people are labeled with an autism spectrum disorder. So it tends to be more about behavior and decision-making than it does with memory. And I think finally, again, probably the most important piece of it is, like I said, a lot of people, especially when they're under 60, they're going to be given a variety of diagnoses. And you got to kind of develop a sense of trust with your doctor. People often look to doctors for all the answers, but they don't always have all the answers. So if you are going through a process of uncertainty and you feel like you can trust the doctor, I would say go with that instinct and trust yourself. Because I think it's your relationship with your doctors that's just as important as what testing they're doing or the types of disease they're thinking about. I mean, when it comes down to it, I think most neurologists will have mostly the same basic education. So, all neurologists should have the same basic knowledge. It's how you interact with them and how they can give you information and how much you can trust the information they're giving you that I think is really as important as almost anything else.
Matt, when I was diagnosed, I actually went to 4 neurologists before I got an answer. That was just very time consuming, and I went through scads of testing. If I suspect that I need to go to a different doctor, how do I find one? Like if I think my symptoms look more like Lewy body or FTD, how do I find a doctor that maybe knows more than just Alzheimer's?
So that's one of the things that organizations like AFTD can certainly help with. I mean, we have relationships with neurologists all across the country. So we know who the experts are and where they work, and certainly can direct you accordingly. Part of the challenge in FTD especially is that it's a rare disease, so there's just not a lot of doctors out there. So oftentimes they are going to be in the big cities, New York City, Manhattan, you may have some choices. If you're living in Kansas, you may not have as many choices. So, where you live is certainly an important part of it. And in terms of, how far are you willing to travel? How much effort are you willing to put into it? And again, sometimes it's easier in some places than others. But typically speaking, the real expertise is going to be found in some sort of academic medical center, somewhere where there is a educational component. That's where a lot of the research goes on. And even though research dollars don't always cover costs or services for basic care, they will cover diagnostic services. And most academic medical centers are going to be able to do a pretty thorough evaluation for anybody who is concerned and has a real legitimate concern. Of those networks, the biggest one is the Alzheimer's Disease Research Network. I don't know exactly how many centers there are, but there are, centers all across the country where there are neurologists and other doctors working specifically on Alzheimer's. If all else fails, if you have no other choice, that's probably a good option. Again, a lot of the basic education all neurologists have is the same. So even if somebody specializes in Alzheimer's, they should be able to say with a fair degree of certainty when something isn't Alzheimer's. And honestly, a lot of the testing that's done is the same regardless of whether you have FTD or Alzheimer's. So generally, you're going to get an MRI or some sort of imaging test. You possibly will be given neuropsychological testing. So the types of testing can be more or less the same. It's the differences is in the results. But the other piece of it also is, again, going back to the idea of peer support, asking people you trust for recommendations is another good way to start. And I'll also add that, in neurodegenerative diseases, diagnosis is not going to be made in a single office visit. It can be a pretty long, drawn-out process. So if you have to see multiple doctors, that's probably not too unusual. And honestly, if you're seeing a good doctor and that doctor's faced with something they're not certain or sure of or don't have much experience with, they're going to give you they're going to suggest you get a second opinion. Oftentimes that's pretty much standard part of the diagnostic process. As you start with a generalist and then move towards more and more specialization.
Great information, Matt. Thank you so much for sharing. I really want to thank you for your time today. And for our listeners, I want you also to know when Matt talks about FTD, that stands for frontotemporal degeneration, and LBD is Lewy body dementia. So just in case we had you a little confused there, I wanted to clarify that. But Matt, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was really nice to be asked to do this. Thank you very much.
Welcome. And for our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast done by Dementia Action Alliance with Laurie Scher and Matt Sharp. And I hope that if you like it, that you'll like it, share it, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So thank you again and have a wonderful day.
We're living beyond dementia, connecting our lives to help us survive. So we spend our time to the fullest we can.